I have been waiting for you. Welcome to my domain, the Portal of Dread. Here, each story is not merely a tale, but a portal I open directly to your worst nightmares. With me, fear is not just told, it is felt in the soul. Turn off the light. Lock the door. Let your own breath guide you through the inevitable labyrinth of madness. If you possess the foolish courage to cross this threshold, subscribe to the channel. And to prove your insolence, type in the comments, "I am not afraid." Now, prepare yourself, the unknown is already here. Today's story. The class in room 304 at São Vicente School that never ended. The silence on the third-floor hallway was different. It wasn't just the absence of kids' voices or the echo of hurried footsteps between classes. It was a heavy silence, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Claudia squeezed my arm when we heard it for the third time. The unmistakable sound of chalk scratching against a blackboard in room 304, the same room that had been locked for 15 years. My name is Junior. I'm 49. And for 3 decades I believed I knew every inch of St. Vincent's Academy in Northwood. It's where I met my wife, Claudia. It's where I built some of the best memories of my youth alongside my best friend, Marcio, and his wife, Marise. We thought that place held nothing but golden memories of our teenage years. We were wrong. So very wrong. In October of 2023, we decided to take a nostalgic trip back to our old school. A simple, even romantic idea. We wanted to show our kids where it all began, where we fell in love, where we dreamed about the future. The principal, our old history teacher, gave us the keys for a private tour after hours. At 7 p.m., when the last staff members left and the gate locked behind us, something shifted. The school we knew by day transformed into something else entirely when cloaked in darkness. Familiar hallways became shadowy tunnels. The classrooms that were once our second home now radiated a chill that seeped right into our bones. But that was just the beginning, because what we discovered that night about St. Vincent's Academy, what we witnessed with our own eyes and ears, forever changed our perception of the places we think we know. Some secrets only show their true face in the dark, and when they do, there's no pretending you didn't see. If you recognize this place, leave a comment, but be careful. Not all echoes from the past should be awakened. Let me properly introduce our group, because what happened that night only makes sense when you understand who we were. Junior, that's me. I own a construction business, always the skeptic of the group, the one looking for a logical explanation for everything. My wife Claudia, an English teacher for over 30 years, has always had a different kind of sensitivity, an intuition I used to lovingly call her vivid imagination. Marcio, my best friend since we were 15, a math professor, is even more rational than I am. For him, everything has a formula, a scientific explanation. And Maurice, his wife, a criminal defense attorney, is used to dealing with the worst aspects of human nature, yet paradoxically, she's the most cautious of us all. We were 4 sensible adults with solid careers and stable families. We weren't impressionable teenagers or people given to mysticism. It's important you understand that. St. Vincent's Academy is in the heart of Northwood, an imposing 1940s building with that classic American school architecture. Long, high-ceilinged hallways, large windows that let in generous light during the day, hardwood floors that echo every step, and that distinct smell of chalk dust, floor wax, and old books that everyone instantly recognizes. During our time as students between 1989 and 1991, that place was buzzing with life. Over 800 students filled its classrooms daily. It was there that Claudia and I would shyly glance at each other during lunch, where Marcio helped me with impossible physics equations, where Maurice organized student council debates with a passion that already hinted at her future career in law. But when we returned that October night, the school was operating at less than half its original capacity. The principal, Mr. Carlos, our old history teacher, explained that a demographic decline in the area and competition from charter schools had drastically reduced enrollment. Several rooms on the second and third floors had been closed for years. The fourth floor, where the science labs were, was completely decommissioned. "You're going to feel a difference," he had warned us while handing over the keys. "An empty building at night has a different energy, kind of melancholic." At the time, we thought he was being poetic. Now we know he was being kind. Our plan was simple. A nostalgic walk, maybe a photo in our old senior classroom, a laugh remembering the pranks we pulled. Claudia had even brought a bottle of champagne to toast to the old days in the courtyard where we first met. We arrived at 7:15 p.m. The sun had already set, and the only lights on were the emergency fixtures in the main hallways. The silence was almost absolute, just the distant hum of traffic on the main avenue and the low buzz of the security lighting. For the first 20 minutes, everything seemed normal. We walked through the ground floor, visited the old library, now much smaller, and laughed at our photos on the alumni wall. Marcio even calculated how many steps we took daily between classes, a typical math nerd joke of his. It was when we started up to the second floor that Claudia stopped abruptly on the staircase. "Did you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice slightly tense. The three of us stopped to listen. Total silence. "Hear what, honey?" I asked. "It sounded like a child singing." Marcio laughed. "Claude, you're just on edge. It's the acoustics of the building." But I saw something in my wife's eyes, a look I knew well after 25 years of marriage. It wasn't nerves. It was recognition. In the comments, tell me, have you ever felt a presence watching you in an empty place at night? What we discovered about the true history of St. Vincent's Academy came from an unexpected source. In the records office, while Maurice was nostalgically flipping through old attendance books looking for our names, Claudia found a forgotten folder wedged between two dusty file cabinets. Inside was a handwritten logbook from Mr. Oswaldo, the old night custodian who worked at the school for over 40 years until he retired in 2018. The first few pages were routine entries, burnt-out light bulbs, leaky faucets, broken windows. But as we read on, the reports took a drastic turn. March 15th, 1995. Second time this week I've found the desks in room 304, all turned to face the blackboard, arranged in perfect rows. I left everything messy when I left yesterday. Going to talk to the day crew. March 22, 1995. The day crew swears no one enters the school at night, but the desks keep arranging themselves, always the same room, always facing the board as if a class were in session. Marcio, ever the rationalist, suggested it could be pranks by students or staff. But as we kept reading, the entries became more disturbing. May 30th, 1998. I can't take the noise on the third floor anymore. Every night, between 11:30 p.m. and 12:15 a.m., I hear footsteps in the hall and quiet voices in room 304. Sounds like a whole class whispering. When I go up to check, it's empty and silent. But the desks are always arranged in a circle, as if they just finished a meeting. September 12th, 2001. I found something terrible in the old archives. Room 304 was the site of a tragedy in 1987. During a severe storm, a short circuit caused a fire on the third floor. 7 students and their teacher, Mrs. Helena, were trapped in the room during an after-school tutoring session. The firefighter who told me said they were found in a circle as if they had gathered for protection. None of them survived. The silence that fell between us was thick. Claudia was holding my hand tightly. Maurice had gone pale. Even Marcio, always skeptical, looked shaken, but there was more. So much more. October 25th, 2003. I can't deny it anymore. They come back every night. I hear Mrs. Helena's voice calling roll. I hear the students answering, present, one by one. Always the same names: Ana Clara, Roberto, Juliana, Marcos, Fernanda, Diego, Beatriz. I looked in the archives. They were all on the list of fire victims. December 18th, 2005. The principal doesn't believe me, but I saw it with my own eyes. Mrs. Helena was at the blackboard in room 304 writing with chalk. She was wearing the same blue floral dress she wore when she was alive. When she saw me, she turned and smiled. She just said, The lesson never ended, Mr. Oswaldo. They still have so much to learn. June 3rd, 2010. I found out why the room was sealed in 2008. It wasn't for structural problems like they said. It was because the phenomena were intensifying. Teachers reported hearing whispers during their daytime classes. Students refused to enter the room. The previous principal made the decision to close it for good. The last entry was from 2017, just a few months before Mr. Oswaldo's retirement. October 31st, 2017. My last night here. I need to warn whoever comes after me, never, under any circumstances, open room 304 after 11 p.m. Mrs. Helena and her students haven't rested. They are still waiting for someone to finish the lesson that was interrupted by the tragedy. I've heard them for 30 years. Every night, the same routine. Roll call, lesson, dismissal. But they never leave. Not until someone completes what they started on that fateful night in 1987. When we finished reading, it was exactly 11:25 p.m. And it was at that moment that we heard, coming from the third floor, the unmistakable sound of a woman's voice, sweet and familiar, echoing through the empty halls. Good evening, children. Shall we begin our lesson? Have you ever experienced something similar? Have you ever felt that familiar places hold secrets that only reveal themselves at certain times? The voice we heard wasn't a distant echo or a muffled whisper. It was clear, close, as if the teacher were just a few feet away from us. Each word was pronounced with that perfect diction only old-school teachers possessed, that affectionate yet firm tone that marked generations of American students. Good evening, children. Shall we begin our lesson? Maurice was the first to react, with her practical lawyer's instinct. Guys, there's someone up there. It could be a trespasser, a homeless person who got into the school. But her voice betrayed the nervousness she was trying to hide. Marzio, always methodical, checked his watch. 11:28 p.m., exactly the time the custodian mentioned in the logbook. The coincidence was visibly unsettling him. I tried to rationalize. It could be some old PA system, a recording stuck on a loop. But my own words sounded weak even to me. Claudia said nothing. She just squeezed my hand and started climbing the stairs. I don't know if it was courage or if something was calling to her, but she moved with a determination I had never seen before. We all followed her, our footsteps echoing in the deathly silence of the third-floor hallway. Each step was a deeper commitment to the unknown. The emergency lighting cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the air was noticeably colder than on the floor below. When we reached the third-floor landing, we stopped instinctively. There, right in front of us, the door to room 304 was slightly ajar. A thin line of yellowish light escaped through the crack. That's impossible, Marzio muttered. The principal said this room has been sealed for 15 years. It was then that we heard the voice again, now even clearer. Ana Clara? A pause. Then the sweet voice of a child. Present, teacher. Roberto? Present. Juliana? Present. The roll call continued, name by name, exactly as Mr. Oswaldo had described in his logbook. 7 children's voices responding to each name, called real, clear, impossible voices. Maurice took a few steps back. Guys, I don't feel good about this. Let's go. But Claudia moved closer to the door, and when she peered through the crack, her entire body shuddered. Junior, she whispered without taking her eyes off the room, you have to see this. I reluctantly approached and looked through the same crack. What I saw defies all logic, any attempt at rational explanation. Room 304 was exactly as it would have been in the 1980s. Wooden desks in rows, a pristine blackboard, a mimeograph machine in the corner, old maps hanging on the wall. But that's not what took my breath away. It was the translucent figures sitting at the desks. 7 children, between 12 and 14 years old, dressed in the characteristic styles of the 80s, sitting in class position. At the blackboard, a middle-aged woman with her hair in a bun, wearing a blue dress with small flowers, was writing a math equation with chalk. They weren't completely solid. It was like looking through clear water. You could see through them, but they were unequivocally there. And most disturbingly, they seemed completely normal, as if this were just another ordinary evening class. "Marcio," I called out softly. "You need to see this." My friend approached skeptically, looked through the crack, and literally stumbled backward. The man who always had an explanation for everything was speechless for a full 30 seconds. This can't be real," he finally managed to articulate. But Maurice, who had approached last, had the most intense reaction. When she looked into the room, she screamed and collapsed onto the floor. "I know her," she exclaimed, pointing at the figure of the teacher. "That's Mrs. Helena. She taught my older sister in the 80s. She died in the fire." It was at that moment that the teacher stopped writing on the board. Slowly, she turned towards us. Her eyes met ours through the crack in the door, and she smiled. A gentle, familiar smile, exactly how a teacher would smile at students who had arrived late. "Ah," she said, her voice now directed at us. "More students have arrived. How wonderful. We have so much to learn today." The 7 children turned in perfect sync and also looked at us. Their young faces, their innocent smiles, their eyes that shone with a light that shouldn't exist. And it was then that we understood. We were no longer visitors in that school. We were part of the class that never ended. Pause here if you're home alone, because what comes next will test the limits of your courage. The door to room 304 swung open all by itself. There was no creak, no sudden movement. It simply opened, as if an invisible hand had gently turned the knob. The golden light emanating from inside had no apparent source. No lamps were on, no candles, no physical explanation for that soft glow. "Come in, please," said Mrs. Helena, gesturing with the same naturalness as a teacher inviting late students. "Class has already started, but there's still time to participate." Our bodies simply wouldn't obey our commands. It was as if our feet had a will of their own. Claudia was the first to take a step forward, then me, then Marcio, and finally a visibly terrified Maurice. As we crossed the threshold, something in our perception of time shifted. The outside sounds, the distant traffic, the hum of the emergency lights, simply vanished. The outside world ceased to exist. We were in a time bubble where only this room, this class, and these faces watching us with genuine childlike curiosity existed. "Please, have a seat, Mrs." Helena instructed, pointing to 4 empty desks in the back row. We were just reviewing the lessons we couldn't finish. The desks were exactly like the ones we used as students. Dark wood, a hinged top, a built-in inkwell. As we sat, I felt the same familiar discomfort from when I was 15. The narrow seat, the wrong height for an adult, the feeling of being back in adolescence. But it was when I looked around that I noticed the first terrible distortion of reality. The 7 children weren't just apparitions. They interacted with the physical environment. Their pencils made noise as they touched the paper. Their breaths were audible, their clothes rustled slightly when they moved. But when I tried to focus my gaze directly on any one of them, they became slightly translucent, as if my brain refused to fully process the impossible information. "Today, we're going to talk about cycles," Mrs. Helena announced, writing on the board with a piece of chalk that left perfectly white marks. "About how some things never truly end, about how learning is eternal." Marcio tried to stand up. "Listen, Mom, we need to leave. This isn't normal, this can't be happening." Mrs. Helena turned to him with a maternally stern expression. "Mr. Fernandez, you were always an excellent math student. But there is knowledge that numbers cannot explain. Please, sit down." The most terrifying part was realizing she knew our names, knew our school records, as if we had been her students decades ago, even though we knew that was impossible. "Ana Clara," she called, addressing a curly-haired girl in the second row. "Can you tell us what you've learned about time?" The child stood up with perfect posture, just as we did in the 80s. "Yes, teacher. I've learned that time is not linear when something is left unfinished, that some lessons transcend death." That true learning knows no boundaries between worlds. Claudia squeezed my hand under the desk. Her fingers were ice cold. "Junior," she whispered almost imperceptibly. "They're getting older." And they were. With every passing minute, the 7 children seemed slightly bigger, slightly more solid. As if our presence was feeding them, strengthening their existence on this plane. "Roberto," Mrs. Helena continued, "tell us about permanence." A thin, bespectacled boy stood up. "Permanence, teacher, is when we don't accept the end. When we refuse to leave before completing our mission. We couldn't leave because our education was interrupted. We need new students to continue learning." It was then that I understood the true nature of the horror we were facing. They weren't simply ghosts trapped by a tragedy. They were a teacher and students who had become part of an eternal cycle of teaching and learning. And we weren't visitors. We were the new students needed to continue this macabre cycle. "Beatrice," Mrs. Helena called, "explain substitution." A girl with braids stood up gracefully. "When old students graduate and leave, new students must take their places. It's the natural order of education. You 4, she pointed directly at us, have come to replace those who have already completed their lessons and were able to move on." Maurice began to tremble visibly. What lessons? What do you want from us?" Mrs. Helena smiled with that infinite patience only truly dedicated teachers possess. "You want to know about the lessons? Very well. The first lesson is about acceptance. You must accept that some situations have no escape. The second is about permanence. You will stay here until you have completely mastered the curriculum. And the third," she paused dramatically, the chalk suspended in the air. "The third lesson is about transformation, because when you finish your studies, you will become the next teachers." The 7 students began to applaud in perfect sync, their claps echoing through the room like distant thunder. If you've made it this far, you're braver than 80% of people. But take a deep breath, because we haven't even gotten close to the end of this class. The applause stopped abruptly, as if someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with expectation. Mrs. Helena placed the chalk on her desk with almost reverent care and walked towards our row. "Now," she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone, "let's begin with the diagnostic test. I need to assess the knowledge level of each of you." Marcio shot up, knocking his desk over in the process. The crash echoed through the room like a gunshot. "Enough! This is insane! We are not your students, we are not children, and we are leaving now." He ran towards the door, but when he reached where the exit should have been, he found only a solid wall. He ran his hands over the smooth surface, desperate. "The door! Where's the door?" We looked back in a panic. The wall was completely smooth, with no sign that there had ever been an opening there. We were sealed inside room 304. "Mr. Fernandez," Mrs. Helena said with infinite patience, "shirking your academic responsibilities has never been an option in my classroom. Please sit down." "No," he screamed, pounding his fists against the wall. "This isn't real. You're dead. You all died over 30 years ago." It was then that the temperature in the room plummeted. Our breath became visible, and a biting cold pierced us to the bone. The 7 children turned to Marcio in perfect unison, their smiles vanishing. "Teacher," said Ana Clara, her childish voice now laced with an unnatural authority, "he's being disrespectful. Shall we apply the standard punishment?" "Punishment?" Claudia asked, her voice trembling. Mrs. Helena sighed sadly. "In life, I always believed that education should be based on love and understanding. But death has taught me that some students only learn through stricter discipline." The children began to rise slowly from their desks. As they stood, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. They were taller than when we arrived. They were no longer 12 or 13-year-old kids. They looked like teenagers, 15, 16 years old. And they were still growing. "You're aging," I whispered. "Evolving," Roberto corrected, his voice now deeper. "Every minute we spend together, every lesson shared, allows us to grow. Soon we will be adults. Soon we can leave. But first, You must take our places." Maurice tried a different approach. Using her lawyer's experience, she tried to negotiate. "Listen, I understand you suffered an injustice, that your lives were tragically cut short. But we are not responsible for that. We can help you in other ways. We can tell your story, honor your memory." "Memory," repeated Juliana, now looking like a 17-year-old young woman. "We don't want to be remembered. We want to live. We want to grow up. We want to graduate and move on. And the only way to do that is to complete our education with new classmates." I stood up, placing myself protectively in front of Claudia. "And if we refuse? What if we don't want to participate in this class?" Mrs. Helena looked at me with genuine sadness. "Junior, my dear student, that was never an option. You entered our classroom voluntarily. You read our course material. You listened to our roll call. You answered our invitation. In true education, there is no dropping out once the activities have begun." It was then that I noticed something terrifying. The windows of the room, which had previously shown the night outside, now displayed only an absolute black void, as if the outside world had ceased to exist entirely. How long have we been here?" Claudia asked. I looked at my watch. The hands were frozen at 11:28 p.m., the exact moment we entered the room. "Time," explained Diego, now the height of a young adult, "works differently here. A class can last for minutes or decades, depending on what we need to learn." "But we have families," Maurice pleaded. "Children who need us, jobs, responsibilities." "So did we," replied Beatrice, her voice now fully mature. "We had dreams, plans, a future, but we learned that some things are more important than our individual will. We learned about sacrifice." Mrs. Helena returned to the blackboard and began to write again. "Today's first lesson is about accepting the inevitable. Who can give me an example of a situation where resistance is futile?" Marcos raised his hand. "Teacher, when you're trapped in a fire and there's no way out." "Very good. Another example?" Fernanda answered. "When you enter a classroom, you can't leave until you've finished all the lessons." The 7 figures, now young adults, looked at us with smiles that mixed compassion and determination. "Don't be afraid," said Ana Clara. "Fear only makes learning more difficult, and you have so much to learn. Brace yourself, because what comes next will haunt you." The true nature of our situation was about to be revealed. Mrs. Helena finished writing on the board and stepped aside, revealing an equation that made my heart stop. It wasn't numbers or letters, it was names. Our names, followed by dates, and a strange symbology that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Junior Martins, enrollment 10-3-2025, graduation pending. Claudia Farias Martins, enrollment 10-3-2025, graduation pending. Marcio Fernandez, enrollment 10-3-2025, graduation pending. Marici Farias Fernandez, enrollment 10-3-2025, graduation pending. Below them, other names with different dates. Carlos Enrique Silva, enrollment 3-15-2019, graduation 3-15-2024. Marina Vasconcelos, enrollment 7-22-2020, graduation 7-22-2023. Rodrigo Santos, enrollment 11-11-2021, graduation 11-11-2024. "Those names," Marici murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "I know some of those names. Carlos Silva. He went missing a few years ago. There was a huge search in town. They never found him." Mrs. Helena nodded sadly. "Carlos was an excellent student, very dedicated. It took him exactly 5 years to completely master the curriculum. When he finished, Ana Clara was finally able to graduate and move on." "Move on to where?" I asked, though a part of me already knew I didn't want the answer. "To eternal rest, of course," replied Roberto, now looking like a man in his 30s. "When someone takes our place here, we can finally depart. It's a perfect system, continuing education and constant renewal." The reality of our situation crashed down on us like an avalanche. We weren't witnessing a haunting. We were planned replacements. spare parts in a supernatural educational machine that fed on human lives. Marina was also an exemplary student, Mrs. Helena continued. 3 years of intensive study allowed Roberto to go on his way, and Rodrigo was an especially quick learner. Just 3 years for Juliana to graduate. Claudia began to shake violently. You killed them. Where are the bodies? Killed them? Repeated Marcos, sounding genuinely offended. Teacher, they've misunderstood us. We don't kill anyone. Of course not, Mrs. Helena agreed. Death is a terrible, violent thing. We offer something much more dignified, transformation. When a student completes our advanced curriculum, they become one of us. Their consciousness integrates into our eternal academic community. It's a form of immortality, really. And the physical bodies? Marzio insisted, though his voice already betrayed that he knew the answer. They dissolve naturally when they are no longer needed, Fernanda explained. It's a painless process, like falling asleep after a long day of studying. It was then that I realized the most terrifying truth of all. I looked at the 7 figures who now appeared as normal young adults and asked, Were you once like us? Did you also come in here thinking you were just visitors? The silence that followed was deafening. Diego was the first to answer, his voice heavy with infinite melancholy. I was a civil engineer. I came here in 1994 to investigate the structural damage from the fire. I was engaged, getting married in 2 months. I was a journalist, said Beatrice. 1997, I was doing a story on haunted schools. I had 2 young children at home. One by one, they revealed their true identities. They weren't the children who died in the 1987 fire. They were people like us, who, over the decades, had fallen into the same trap. People who investigated the school, who came out of curiosity, who were seduced by the tragic story. And the real children? Claudia asked, tears streaming down her face. They graduated a long time ago, Mrs. Helena answered with maternal pride. Ana Clara, Roberto, Juliana, Marcos, Fernanda, Diego, and Beatrice, my dear original students, moved on in 1995 when the first replacements completed the program. We have kept the educational tradition alive ever since. But were you really a teacher here? Mrs. Helena smiled with a deep sadness. I was the principal of a school in a neighboring state. I came to investigate the fire in 1989 as part of a school safety program. When I completed my studies here, the real Mrs. Helena was finally able to rest. I assumed her identity and her mission. The room began to spin around us. Decades of replacements, of missing people, of interrupted lives and assumed identities. An endless cycle of an educational predator that fed on human curiosity. How many? Maurice asked in a whisper. How many people have been through this? We lost count after 50, the current Mrs. Helena admitted. But each one contributed to the perpetuation of knowledge. No life was wasted. Marcio fell to his knees. My kids, my wife, they'll look for us. And when they come looking, said Ana Clara, who was once a real person with her own name and life, they will be welcomed as new students. The cycle continues. Education never stops. It was in that moment that we understood there was no escape, no negotiation, no happy ending. We were part of a supernatural machine of human replacement that had been operating for decades, and our only choice was how long it would take us to accept our fate. The last thing I saw before I passed out was Mrs. Helena writing on the board. Lesson 1. Acceptance is the first step to true education. Take a deep breath. You will never forget this revelation. But it's not over yet. When I woke up, I was sitting at a school desk. Room 304 had changed again. It now looked like a modern classroom with computers and a whiteboard. But the air was still thick with that unmistakable supernatural energy. Claudia was beside me, conscious, but with a distant look in her eyes I had never seen before. Marcio and Maurice occupied the desks in front of us, equally altered. We no longer looked like the same middle-aged adults who had walked in here. There was something different in our faces, in our eyes. "Welcome to your second day of class," announced the familiar voice of Mrs. Helena. "I hope you've reflected on yesterday's lessons." I looked at the clock on the wall. It read 7:30 a.m. But which morning? Which day? How much time had passed? "Professor Junior," she addressed me with unnerving casualness, "how are you feeling about your new responsibilities?" It was then that I understood. I was no longer just a student. I was a teacher's assistant, part of the faculty of this impossible institution. And the only way out was to find my own replacements. Over the days, or weeks, or months that followed, I learned the rules of the game. I learned that some people can resist longer, holding on to their original identity for years. Others integrate quickly into the system. And a select few find loopholes. I am telling you this story because I have discovered a possible way out. There are moments when the barrier between room 304 and the outside world becomes weaker. Moments when I can communicate with people on the outside, plant seeds of information, send out warnings. Every time someone reads this story, every time someone comments, every time someone shares it, the energy spreads. And maybe, just maybe, it weakens the power that keeps this place running. You who have made it this far, you who felt the chill run down your spine, you who looked over your shoulder while reading, you understand. You feel the presence that dwells between the lines of this narrative. But I need to ask a crucial question, and I ask that you answer with absolute honesty in the comments. Have any of you ever visited an abandoned school at night? Have you heard voices in places that should have been empty? Have you ever felt like you were being watched by eyes you couldn't see? Because if the answer is yes, you might be closer to room 304 than you think. And if any of you happen to know stories about people who disappeared after investigating haunted locations, people who left home to just take a look and never came back, share those stories. They might be pieces of a puzzle far larger than we realize. I am still here, on the border between being and not being, trying to find a way to break this cycle. But until then, every person who reads this story, every person who shares it, every person who believes becomes part of a network that may be our only hope. The bell is ringing. The next class is about to begin, and somewhere in America, another abandoned school is waiting for curious visitors. Share this only with those brave enough to lose sleep tonight, because some stories once known never leave us. And remember, not all classrooms teach subjects listed in the official curriculum. Some teach lessons that scar the soul forever. Fear Portal. The story ends, but the echo remains. What Fear Portal story would you like to see next? Leave your suggestions in the comments. And so, another story comes to an end. Or was it just a delusion? Sometimes the line between reality and nightmare is thinner than we think. And you, do you still trust your own mind? Share your madness in the comments. So you don't lose your sanity alone, like, subscribe and ring that bell. We have more disturbances scheduled for next week. Sleep well if your conscience allows. See you soon at the Fear Portal.